The New York Post describes our next guest as the man who could have been Shah. Reza Pahlavi is the son of the last Shah of Iran. He was a teenager at school in the United States when his father relinquished the throne in 1979. Iran was then transformed into the religious theocracy that we see today. And Reza joins us now. He remains focused on a goal of using nonviolent messaging toward igniting a revolution that replaces Iran's brutal regime. And thank you so much for being on the show this morning. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
I want to start by asking for you to describe the status of the regime in Iran as it stands right now, and within that, the support for it or lack thereof of the people of Iran. What do you think Americans need to understand about the people of Iran versus the regime that runs it?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on your show. I will start by saying that after 40 years, the Iranian people had the ability to compare where our country was headed and where we are at now. Iran should have been by now the second Japan of the Middle East. Instead, we have become the North Korea of the Middle East. It's not because the people have changed. It's not because our natural resources are gone. It's the nature of a regime that from the very beginning had as an ambition to export an ideology at the expense of the Iranian nation, and rather of being in the mindset of prosperity, it's been in a mindset of expansionism. As a result, Iranians today who are facing poverty, 60% of Iranians live under the poverty line. Our currency has been devalued more than 10,000 times what it was at the time of the revolution. People are queuing for fuel and food, and instead they see billions of dollars spent on missiles and drones that are hitting other countries or helping the Russians in the campaign against Ukraine, while not a single penny is spent on the people themselves. Therefore, they have come to the conclusion that as long as this regime is in place, we will not see or have the opportunities, not just about liberties and freedoms, but also opportunities to grow and prosper.
Mr. Pahlavi, there's clearly many in Iran who agree with what you're saying, but I'm not quite sure where the chinks are in the Iranian regime. You look at what happened in 2022. There was an enormous amount of coverage here in the United States, in Europe as well, of all of those very brave young Iranians who went out onto the streets and took off their headscarves. But 22,000 people were imprisoned. More than 500 young people were killed by the regime, and those demonstrations have effectively died away. The regime implemented a campaign of fear, and it beat the demonstrations. What makes you confident that the regime is on its back foot and looking fragile?
Well, because there's some missing elements. Look, as you pointed, people have been fighting this regime for years, demonstrations after demonstrations in different decades and different generations, leading up to the Women Life Freedom Movement, which was the strongest and most provocative of its kind. But there were some missing elements. You cannot expect people who are completely defenseless and armless to fight an extremely repressive regime while not a single act of support have been given to them. Rather, money has been released to a regime that has been spending it even more on its proxy wars, but also in its campaign of repression at home. And there's only that much that you can do as a citizen using non-violent method to ask for change, facing a regime that is extremely brutal without getting any element of support from the outside world. And I must point the issue that, in fact, most of the movements of, call it liberation or saving yourselves from dictatorial systems or racist system, could not have happened in modern history without the tacit support of the Western free world. Example, Lech Walesa and Solidarity in Poland. Example, the ANC in South Africa. This was not possible without the application of either economic sanctions on those regimes, but also some tacit support. The two missing ingredients that we have had so far facing this regime has been lack of support from the outside world, which is why I've been calling for a policy of parallel to whatever is a campaign of maximum pressure, meaning economic sanctions on the regime. There is the necessity of also having maximum support. This is going to be the game changer. If that decision is made, if finally some key governments realize that it is futile to expect behavior change from a regime that in its DNA cannot be anything other than what it has displayed, the time has come to invest on an alternative, and that are the people of Iran themselves who are calling for liberation, have the very same values of the Western free world, unlike a regime that doesn't have the slightest value for humanity or equality or justice.
Claire McCaskill has the next question. Claire?
Yes, sir. As somebody who was very involved in the Iranian nuclear agreement under the Obama administration, it was controversial from day one. I would love your perspective on Iran's nuclear ambitions right now. Where do they stand? And what impact did walking away from that agreement have on the danger that this regime poses to the world?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest issue that you have dealing with this kind of regimes is a little bit like it's not the gun but the finger on the trigger, which is the ultimate threat. Can you even trust this regime? Does any kind of agreement actually give you the sense of security that they will abide by it? It's a ticking time bomb, and there was not an indefinite timing on that. So the approach about dealing with this regime only on the nuclear issue forgot all the other aspects and role that this regime has in regional instability and interference into neighbors' affairs. Now, why would this regime use the same logic of deterrence that some key nuclear countries have used in the past? I don't think that people lose sleep at night knowing that France is a nuclear country. It's a democracy. The problem is when you have dictatorships, a totalitarian system that are potentially could be armed with such technology. So the threat is the nature of the system itself. And I don't think there's any kind of agreement that can give anyone the satisfaction that now we're all right and they will be good boys and abide by those principles. So a little bit of time has been wasted. The best trust, and I think this is something that the Israelis understand, the Saudis understand, our immediate region understand, that the regime itself is the threat. Once the regime disappears, every aspect that has been threatening the region with instability, whether it is the support for the proxies that the regime has, fomenting terrorism, the nuclear threat, all of this disappears at once. And that the difference will be a nation that is now committed to regional stability and cooperation and togetherness, as opposed to a regime that is doing the exact opposite. Here lies the alternative.
The eldest son of the late Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, thank you very much for your insights this morning. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.